Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming downtown on a rainy Sunday. Welcome to the first installment of our 2019 Marie Northrop Lecture Series. I'm Todd Godowski, President of the Los Angeles City Historical Society. I'd like to thank the library for making the Mark Taper Auditorium available to us, to the History Department and the Technical Services Department, Alan in the control room, for making this all work. And I'm going to turn this over momentarily to the chair of the Marie Northrop Lecture Committee, Michael Holland, who will introduce the panel and the film. But just a little housekeeping business. Thank you all for coming. We're working on a series of events for our members and non-members, members and guests over the coming year. We have a flyer out on the podium in the foyer in the lobby. There's a couple flyers about a library event and another Kcet event. Please take all of that literature. And there's some membership applications. All of our programs are pretty much funded by our membership dues, so if you like these activities and want to support them, please consider joining the Los Angeles City Historical Society. For those of you who are already members, thank you. We have about half of our board in attendance. Could I get our board members to just hold up their hands so people know who your board members are? Thank you all. If any of you have a question for the board, you can pigeonhole me or any of these board members after. We'll be happy to talk to you, and we'll be happy to take your application. And with that, let me introduce Michael Holland, chair of the Marie Northrop Lecture Series.
Thank you, Todd. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, thank you for coming out on a wet Sunday. Quick show of hands, how many people in here are Huell Howser fans? All right, that's pretty easy. Let's do something a little bit trickier. How many people here are supporters, I mean paying supporters of Kcet? I have to admit, I kind of fell off the wagon a little bit ago. Sorry, Amanda, I'll make amends. And okay, here, one more. How many people here are members of the Los Angeles City Historical Society? Okay, we got to do something about that. No, as Todd pointed out, yeah, you can certainly talk to any one of us after we're finished here, because events like this is what we want to do for our membership. And so in some cases, events like this tend to be very popular. Some of them fill out, and so the first people who will know about it will be our membership, even before it goes to Facebook or Eventbrite or some of the other ways that we have of contacting people. So if you don't want to miss out on whatever else we've got up our sleeves, you should probably consider, joining the Historical Society and staying in touch with us. Okay, get that commercial out of the way. And I do want to, right at the top, thank Amanda Martin and the staff at Kcet for partnering with the City Historical Society for this year's series of events. This is something completely brand new, and so it's it feels a little bit like a high wire act, but we're learning as we go along, and so far gravity hasn't pulled the rug out from under us yet. So I'm looking forward to what our panel has to say, and as I said, I'm jazzed about that. Okay, so just to kind of give you an idea of how things are going to progress, we do actually have a video package, and if you've been to any of these things, you know that I usually have a video package about whatever the topic is, and so we'll have that. The location of the video package will be obvious to one and all very, very quickly, and we'll just kind of let it go at that. And then after the video, we'll introduce our panel, we'll bring them up, and we'll start our discussion, and we will allow time for Q&A. So that way we'll have a couple people with microphones going amongst you, and so, please feel free to pay attention and ask your questions at the appropriate time. And as I had mentioned before we started, and I'll say it one more time, we are going to have a book signing out in the foyer with our panelists. Copies of Louis Fuerte's book is actually in the library bookstore, and if you don't already have one, As soon as we're finished here, it'll take a few minutes to move everyone out to the foyer. You can certainly have time to go and buy one and bring it back here for them to sign. And so without any further ado, I'm going to give Alan the signal to darken the lights, and let's start the video package, and let's go. Okay, well, that's going to be a hard act to follow, but I think we will certainly do our best to try. Let me go ahead and introduce our panel from the extreme end here. Harry, and please forgive us, Pallenberg, thank you, one of the producers. Phil Noyes, one of the other producers. And the third gentleman here, oh, this is Louis. This is the guy. This is the guy. This is Louis. Let me just to start off real quickly, and in your book, and as I mentioned, we have books in the bookstore. A lot of great stories in here, but one of them that I'll just start off with right off the bat is when you and Huell will be out shooting somewhere, and after a while, being acknowledged so much from the front of the camera, look, Louis, look at this, look at, that kind of thing. And someone would actually come up to Huell and say, who's Louis? Where's Louis? And what would he do? What was his response?
No, there we go. When he started talking to Louis, it kind of created a little monster for him, because then he'd be on his days off in Palm Springs, and everybody would come up to him and say, where's Louis? And he'd come and tell me these things, and he's tell him, I says, Louis and I are not attached at the hip. So it did create some issues for him. I never wanted to be in front of the camera. That was never my thing, and still isn't. But I think he's paying me back for not taking his car into habit service.
Well, what I was alluding to is you've got a great little story in here where you'd be out shooting, and someone would come up and say, Louis, and he would just kind of point at some random person and say, that's him over there.
Right. He'd be anywhere, and people come up and ask him, where's Louis? And he'd say, oh, he's over there on the other side getting a beer or something.
And so this random person would have someone coming up to him asking, are you Louis? And, But we were talking earlier, and you actually started off very early you started your TV career in about 1969, I think it was?
It was around, yeah. After the service, I started studying television, and I started around 68, around that time.
And for those people who may not be of a certain age, hopefully almost everyone in here remembers the difference between VHF and UHF. You had 2, 4, all the way up to 13 on UHF, and then VHF. Then UHF, I grew up in Orange County. The only thing that we really had that I remember was 28, was Kcet. But besides the 3 big broadcasters, you had Channel 9, Channel 5, Channel 13, KCOP.
KCOP.
You served some time with KCOP.
I served time with KCOP.
Yeah. And so those were the independent stations, and so the culture at an independent station was certainly different because they had smaller staffs, and so you may have been a cameraman credit, but you certainly learned to do everything else in addition to that.
Of course, yes, we liked moving around. I did like moving around, lighting, editing, operations, all this kind of stuff. I like doing that, so it was kind of fun, and I really loved it.
And so you were always doing something different, something fresh, and
Correct.
as you mentioned it, you could have fallen into a position where you would have just been logging videotape the rest of your career if you had gone in that particular route. You would have been stuck in one job.
Right, and no, I love what I did. I love moving around, and I got to work with great people like Carrie and Phil, and they're the ones that really took the brunt of the work because they had to wear so many hats. And but I love videography.
And I remember I was watching the package, and now just so everybody knows, the first clip and the last clip when they're out in the park, that was what you shot.
Yes, I shot. A lot of people asked me, "Did you shoot this show?" And I said, "Well, is Huell wearing his shirt tucked in, or is he wearing it out?" Mm-hmm. Because when I worked with him, he always wore his shirt tucked in. Mm-hmm. He was very well built, very worked out all the time. Then after I left, and I noticed he's wearing his shirts out, that's because he loved his hamburgers.
Yeah, you got some great stories about that. Yeah. And in watching that particular sequence, when you've got the stairs in several different places, and you're kind of having to navigate the stairs with the camera on your on your shoulder, and he suddenly decides, oh, he's going to go over here, and you have to catch up. You have to not only catch up with him, you have to get around in front of him.
Right.
For a lot of those interviews, and so yes. you had to try to be a step or two ahead of him.
It was very challenging, but as we got to know each other and I got to know him, I sort of knew how to read him by his tone of his voice and things like that, the moves that he would make. So I kind of would always keep an eye on him with my left eye and see what he was going to do, whether, like in interviews, he had this habit of sometimes just walking away and he would see somebody else and go, start another interview. Mm-hmm. So I had to watch out for those things. So it's very challenging.
But it was, and of course, so it was a two-man team. It was you and Huell.
And Huell, yes.
You had a sound guy very early on, but then you were able to basically get rid of that third person when the microphones were installed on the cameras.
Right, when the wireless systems came in and all that. And so, yeah, it became a one-man band.
So it obviously put a lot of pressure on you because you were the one responsible for everything.
Right, and being an editor, lighting director, which I love doing, I could make things work, and I could stop Huell if the interview wasn't going right or he was getting ahead of me, and I could stop him and he would listen to the tape and say, okay, I'll pick it up from here. And then I'd reposition myself to make it look like a two-camera shoot or something like that. So it was challenging.
Was he self-critical? If he took a look at what he had done, would he pick up on, oh, that looks awful, we can definitely do better than that? Or did he just kind of take you at your word? He didn't have to see it for himself.
No, the only thing he ever looked at is if I stopped him, and he would look at the tape to hear what he was saying, and he would say, oh, okay, I'll pick it up from here. And but as far as the shooting, hardly ever, never.
Okay. Now, of course, that's half of the equation. The other half of the equation had to do with what was going on at the studio, at Kcet, at the mothership, as you two were the ones who had to, I guess, take his vision or take the idea that he may have started with and lay the groundwork that would end up being a trip up north, for example, for he and Louis to go and do a series of shoots in different locations. And so you guys had to work out the logistics. And as I understand it, sometimes you'd be up there, something wouldn't work out quite the way it was supposed to, but on the other hand, some other material kind of presented itself, and you'd shoot that. And so for you two, were you ever surprised by either what came back or sometimes what didn't come back to to the office at the end of their trip as far as, you know, wait a minute, you didn't go up to shoot. I'm just curious about that.
What's that? I've got one good one after you. Okay. Yes, it was. Yes, it was always an adventure, and these guys would take off and they'd be going to shoot, you know, a show about a barn on the Central Coast, and they'd come back with 3 extra shows that we had nothing to do with, and that happened a lot. And they'd be driving down the road, and he'll go, "What is that?" And they'd turn around and he would meet some guy, and he'd go, "Well, yeah, this is my cotton field." And he'd go, "Louis, get the camera." And he didn't want the guy to really talk too much because he wanted to get it on camera. So Louis would grab the camera and he'd start rolling, and he'd come back with 3 or 4 extra shows. So, and you know, our sponsors loved us because they'd pay us for 12 shows. We always did extra shows. I mean, and who does? Nobody does that in this business. That does not exist. Now, you may go back to the sponsor and ask for more money. Huell even since he's gone, I can say this, he actually gave money back to a sponsor one year, which was just, they couldn't believe it. It was, that's really never done.
But I was just going to add to one story where he went up to shoot Coco, the signing gorilla, and he came back with no tapes. And I was very upset because I was sort of like the animal guy in the office, and most of the animal shows were mine. But I guess Coco liked Huell and watched Huell on TV. And they always, you know, you always say, like, you don't want to meet your heroes in person. And I guess Coco and Huell did not actually get along well when he was introduced to her in the cage. And so they actually sort of canceled the show. And it was for Huell, it was a complicated show. He had to get vaccinations. At that time, I believe it was Cameraman was the cameraman. And Cameraman had to get vaccinations. So, and we never got to see the tape. And Huell apparently destroyed it when he got into the parking lot. Because I went down to the garage and looked through all the tapes because I was desperate to find the Coco tapes, but they don't exist. So.
Oh, that's too bad. But just kind of back up just a little bit. I mean, we talked a little bit about your early, your early history, Louis, and very early days at KCOP. I mean, you were doing all sorts of things. You were shooting boxing matches at the Olympic. You were doing roller derby. And all the sorts of things that were going on as far as local programming, which is kind of a different thing, because the audience for those sorts of shows is very, very local, hyper local, as we would now call it. And but what you were doing with Huell obviously had a much bigger reach, but you had to start somewhere. And so how did that? I guess what I'm looking for is the expansion of local news stories or local human interest stories becoming something bigger than what the local market was all about.
Well, when I was at KCOP, it was sort of a learning process for me, and I liked moving around, learning the different aspects of engineering. And as I grew, and then came to Kcet in 1972, Kcet was doing so much, and they hired me because they asked me, says, "We want you to work here as a cameraman, but we also want you to move and work in all areas of engineering." I said, "It's perfect, it's what I want to do." So Kcet was doing so much production, dramas, concerts, a lot of local programming, so it gave me the opportunity to really zoom in my craft, and I really enjoyed that. So that gave me the knowledge to go into the one-man band operation, and because I understood what it took to cut a story. And I think that's why when Huell hired me, we just had this real great professional relationship, and we worked out the kinks as we went along and made it work.
Phil, what was your early background? What brought you into the industry?
I, believe it or not, was an actor, which is a horror story, and I moved down here. Well, I was a photographer and an actor from San Francisco, so I moved down here, and I thought, okay, I'm going to see where see where I land. I got here and went on a couple of auditions and quickly realized that is not what I wanted to do. So I went into the photography world and actually worked for some pretty famous photographers here in Los Angeles. Also got into documentary filmmaking, and had just come back from an expedition to cross the Bering Straits in kayaks, and had been part of this kind of amazing journey. And I was bartending in the evenings at this time, and Huell came in, and it was early. And he sat down and we started talking, and I was a Huell fan. I mean, I loved his shows. And we just sat and talked for hours, while I'm bartending. And at the end of the night, I said, listen, if you ever need anybody to work for you, please, I would love that opportunity. And he said, give your 2-week notice. I was like, okay, well, look, I think you're maybe a little drunk. So here's my phone number. Don't call me too early because I'm a bartender. I'm not going to get home till 3 in the morning. So at 7 o'clock the next morning, my phone rang, and it was Huell. And he said, give your 2-week notice. And I was with him for almost 19 years.
Harry, can you top that?
No, that's a much better story than mine. But yeah, so I was in the film industry. I started as a PA and worked my way up, and was dissatisfied with it. I thought it was sort of gross and very ego-centric, and I worked on a movie where they spent $50,000 on scotch and cigars for the director and the star, and I was like, I can make a whole movie for $50,000. So I convinced a trust fund friend of mine to give me that much money, and I made a movie with a partner who actually worked with Phil at Kcet for Huell, Morgan Neville, who was credited on that one. You picked an episode that I didn't have a credit on, but that was good. And so Morgan was leaving, and actually Morgan and I lived together, and they obviously needed a new person, and Morgan said my roommate, Harry, can sub in for me. So that's what happened, and I was there for 15 years, so that's how I got my job with Huell.
So what were the expectations of the job? I mean, what did you have to do to get everything prepped, get everything ready for them to go out? And as I understand it, Huell didn't want to, as you mentioned earlier, he really didn't want to know too much before he got to where you were going, but he had to have some idea who was going to be waiting for him there. He just didn't want to have their backstory until he got there, right?
Yeah, well, everything started with story meetings, which happened whenever Huell would come into the office, so usually like at least once a month, and we would go through the mail. We got tons of mail, and then later we got tons of emails, but when I started, we were still getting lots of handwritten letters. And so we would sit around in the main bullpen area, and he would read a letter, and he would like, who wants this? And it'd be like, Phil or Harry, and he would just give us the letter, and we would have to research it. And so that would entail tracking down the person, finding out if that would be the right person to be on-camera interview, if there were archival photos, or if there was, film, hopefully it could be found. And so then we would meet, a month later, and we'd go over and we'd say, okay, this is a great story. I found these pictures, and we would show Huell the pictures and tell him a little bit about it. But, we would have talked to the person on the phone, but Huell usually wouldn't have talked to the person on the phone beforehand until right before, and then he would do a quick phone call just to sort of check in, but not get too much information, like you said. So he was fresh, he could walk in, and when he would be like, oh my gosh, like, that was real. So, I mean, it was, for us, we had to get all the regular machinations of, travel and hotel and all that kind of stuff, but also just understanding what the show would be. Are there the right elements for the show that we know that he's gonna wanna make? And obviously, as years went on, it became such a well-oiled machine. I mean, we knew if it was a good show, like, right away, within 2 minutes of talking to the person on the phone. And then when they would email and cell phones, we would say, like, go outside and take a picture, north, south, east, west, and email it to us. And, I don't know, we just were able to figure it out really quickly. And also, the tapes, in the early days, they would come back from a shoot, and they would have, like, 8 or 9 half-hour tapes. And towards the end, they would come back, and they would have, like, 2 or 3 half-hour tapes for a, half-hour show, which is, very rare to have that kind of a shooting ratio where almost everything makes it. And that's because they knew exactly, what was happening. Like you said, you could tell it is his voice or the way he looks at it. Even now when I watch a show, I can see when he's ready to wrap up a segment. Like, it became like a shorthand.
Yeah, and I'll just add two things. When these guys would come back from a long, especially a long shoot, we had these meetings Harry was talking about, and Huell would go into his pocket, and there'd be a wad of Post-it notes, cards, napkins, and it would say Bob Elephant and a phone number. But his memory was so amazing. He would say, I met this guy. He's off 395. He's got 3,000 porcelain elephants. That's that. And then there'd be another card that would say Jeanette, koi pond. And he would have a detailed story about who Jeanette was and why he thought it was a good story. And he would go through these little pieces of paper. And we would always make a file for everything. And every one of those files started with whatever that was taped, that little Post-it note. If you go and you look at those at the Chapman, you'll see his writing and whatever that first thing was. And that's how a lot of stories got started. And I also want to add that some of the shows that we produced were incredibly complicated. Most were not. But, I mean, he put us through the ringer. He would ask us to organize. We did a show called Wet in the Waters, which was so complicated. And, it was something that took place in the 30s, and he wanted to keep it as real. And there was a 20 mule team, and there was this very specific 1937 Lincoln Zephyr, and there was, a plane that flew over Badwater. And I mean, we had to find a Native American runner to run up to Mount Whitney with a gourd of water. So
A 20 mule team had not been assembled in California for over like 30 years.
yeah. So we did it, and
Real 20 mule team.
we pulled it off, and it was. So, and frankly, those were the shows that we relished as producers, right? We wanted to dig our teeth into these things.
And he hated it.
And he hated those shows, so.
Because he would have to be on that show, sorry, when he was going across Death Valley, we were on a very tight schedule. We had to meet like the superintendent of the Death Valley National Park, and he saw these two guys on bikes, and he pulled over and started talking to them. And we're like, this is one of the shoots that we were actually there on because it was so complicated. And we're like, Huell, no, you can't talk to these two guys. First of all, they're Italian, they don't even speak English, and they're trying to have this conversation about why they're riding bikes through the middle of Death Valley. And I'm like, we have an airplane, and this 1937 car is gonna overheat any second. And so he really didn't like those kind of shows because they were, on a schedule that he didn't like to keep. But that was a great episode.
And Louis, in the book, you have a great chapter in there about shooting the California missions, all of them, in, what was it, 2 weeks or something like that, or 20?
Something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
some
we started.
horrendous schedule.
We did something in Baja, and that's where he kind of discovered the missions. They built like 18 missions down in Baja, and then when they came up to California, the Franciscans took over. So he got the idea to do the missions, and we do, if they were close by, we do 2 or 3 missions a day. Well, by the time we got to the 17th mission, he turns to me and says, Louis, I'm thinking of, by the time we get done with this, of becoming a Catholic. I said, I think you better give that some serious thought. And he says, why? Because you're going to have to go to confession and confess all the sins you've committed. He says, I didn't do anything. You're right.
But he certainly had some.
Can I add something to that?
Please,
Because
please.
it relates to this. So the mission series was my baby. And I called Carolyn Kozo-Cole, and the librarian that was here, who is one of all of our favorite people. It was so beautiful to see her. I literally teared up. And, again, we just showed up, and she just opened the library for us, and there was the most incredible archival material here that, of course, we could use whatever and whenever we wanted. So thanks to her and the library for making many of our shows so much better and easier.
Yeah, just to kind of jump around, those 2 episodes were actually owned by Kcet, so we were actually able to use them. And Carol, unfortunately, just passed a few months ago. And so I heard about that, and so I saw her in the clip. I got to find a way to incorporate this because she was loved by the library, even though I never met her, but it was fun to use. But there were so many there were so many ideas that Huell had. I mean, visiting, of course, was one series. You can go all the way back to Video Log when he basically took that over and expanded what that filler show could do into California Gold and visiting, and then the other things such as the missions and the national parks and some of the state parks and some of the other ideas that he had. And there were a few, let's face it, there were a few things that didn't work. You know, I mean,
I was just gonna say that, the bench.
what was that all about?
Huell on a bench.
And that was the problem. He was supposed to stay on the bench.
He was just going to sit on a bench and go to different benches and talk to people. Well, trying to get Huell to sit down anywhere was impossible, even when we would go out to eat, you know. So yeah, it evolved pretty, it was the bench in name only, and was the same. You know, the truth is all the shows were the same show, right? I mean, they just had different names. And it was Huell doing what he does so well.
Was he trying to expand beyond that that kind of man on the street thing? I mean, did he see himself as an actor as opposed to
No.
you know, an interviewer, a journalist?
No, he was a storyteller, and that's all he ever wanted to be. And listen, we were asked to go national many times, and he wanted nothing to do with it. He hated bureaucracy in any way, shape, or form. I would get these contracts from our funders, and they'd be, 21 pages, and he would have me send it back. He would say, send it back. That's
Back with the check.
yeah, this is ridiculous. Have them make it 1 page or 2 pages. This is ridiculous. So I have the job of calling, Wells Fargo Bank, going, can you make this contract a little shorter? Very awkward, but no, he had no aspirations. I mean, he did a voice on The Simpsons, which he loved. He did a couple of little things here and there, but no, that's all he ever wanted to do, and that's all the fame that he wanted. He liked the amount of fame that he had. It was just enough.
The right size fish in the right size pond. That's what he himself said in the office sometimes. So
There we go. And actually, touching on Wells Fargo, I mean, the story of how California Gold got funded, was a great story. Basically he knew that he had to find the money for it, and so his idea was to talk to Wells Fargo, and the condition that they had was that you got to get all of the PBS affiliates in California, I think there were like 13 of them, on board, that they have to agree to air this thing. And so he told you that that's what he was going to have to do. How long did it, and just thinking, what do you think those meetings must have looked like? I mean, if he didn't care for the bureaucracy, but he had to go in and persuade people to give him money, and then persuade the studio executives, these affiliates, to run it. I mean, for a guy who didn't like bureaucracy, I'm sure he ran into more than his fair share of it.
I could take this if you want. I mean,
Okay.
he hated bureaucracy. He loved people. So he took 2 weeks off. He got in his convertible Alfa Romeo, which he drove then before the Ford Explorers, and he drove to every single PBS affiliate and made appointments. And it's PBS. It's not exactly like CBS National. Rohnert Park is not a hotbed of activity. But he'd make an appointment, and he would go in, and he was very charming, and he would sit down like he would with anybody in this room, and he'd shake your hand, and he'd look in the eye and go, this is what I want to do. And for them, it didn't cost them anything. So there was no real reason for them to say no. He had a little tape that he had made. I'm sure they popped that in. They looked at it, and they said, sure, if you can pull it off and get the money, we'll air it. Well, he did that, drove around, went to every 13 PBS affiliates, got everyone to sign off, went back to Wells Fargo and said, okay, let's go. That was it.
What did Wells Fargo get out? What did they expect to get out of the deal, other than positive publicity?
Yeah, they got a 30-second bumper at the front and a 30-second bumper at the end. And then we did some stunts with them where we would do maps, and you would go to events, and there were some little things like that. But I think very quickly they were just very happy to be a part of something that was so special and so important. And initially I think they were on board for a couple of years, but I think it ended up being 11 or 12 years that they were our sponsor.
How different, okay, so that being what it was, being as unique as it was because it was Huell who was spearheading all this, what's the environment like today if someone tried to do even something remotely similar to what Huell had done? I mean, first of all, can you even get a meeting with with a bank or some large institution as a sponsor? Could you get a meeting with the affiliates to possibly maybe talk about doing this thing?
This is Harry and I's hell that you're talking about, so here, you take that.
I don't know. Yeah, it seems unlikely that it could happen today. I would say Huell had a power of personality, right? Like he would enter the room and he just dominated the room instantly. And I think you would have to be that type of personality to make that even close to working. But even then, I think it's very difficult. And especially with his hatred of bureaucracy and the contracts. I mean, he really did send a contract back with the check because it was too complicated. And he basically berated them on the phone for sending over such a complicated document. And like, I just don't think that could work today.
They did send a new contract.
Yeah, it said basically, see the thing that we're not supposed to show Huell, that's hidden in the vault. And that's another reason, just a slight sidebar, as far as a national show, they had very strict time lengths. Like a show had to be 26 minutes and 52 seconds or something like that. And 26:46, okay, thank you. I know, she was the one who always had to deal the brunt of the thing because Huell would come over the show and sometimes they were like 31 minutes long, which is completely insane. You cannot have a show that's longer than the time slot it fits in. And he would just do it, and Kathy would have to figure out a way to make it fit into the schedule. And it was always a pleasure bringing her the tape and it had that. I had a sick pleasure in bringing her those tapes. So yeah, this one's 29:59, enjoy. Yeah. But, so yes, that's one of the reasons why he didn't do the national shows, because he knew he couldn't give them a show that wasn't exactly on the number. Kathy, he could give it to.
Yeah. And one other thing, note on getting funding. Yes, Kathy should get a lot of credit. Huell would come back, he'd come in the morning, he'd say, I've got funding for the park show. I'm like, what park show? What are you talking about? And he'd go, I sat with the president of Toyota at a dinner last night, and I pitched him a show on national parks, and they're giving us $180,000. It's like, oh, okay, and here's his secretary, call her. So that happened a lot. It was a lot of handshakes. It was a lot of Huell. Huell would never call and set up a meeting and go in blind. It was all word of mouth and him being introduced by other people or literally meeting people at a cocktail party.
In the end, when his archives were donated to Chapman University, and some of that is because he literally met the president of Chapman on a show, and the president sent a handwritten note, and this was, sort of towards the end, and where people would send emails, and Huell was so floored by the fact that he got a handwritten note. He's like, oh my God, get him on the phone. And he called, and they became friends because based on the guys writing a handwritten note. So it's kind of that old country charm, proper way of doing things.
So it sounds like that Kcet and Huell were basically the perfect match. I mean, Huell couldn't have done what he wanted to do as he did it, probably with anyone else. I mean, Kcet had to be flexible enough and I guess daring enough to go with this and stay with it. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Yes, very. They got out of the way. I mean, there's some people here that, well, I'm sure will agree that pretty quickly Kcet, and then they'd get some new program manager or somebody that would come in and they would try to assert themselves, and it just didn't go over well. And Huell did what he wanted. And most of the time, Kcet was smart enough to let him do that and just get out of the way. And, nobody ever looked at a tape. Nobody ever previewed a tape. That would never happen. We handed that tape to Kathy, and that's what went on the air. And that's an unusual thing, very unusual thing in this business.
So Louis, you had a whole bunch. There's a whole bunch of great stories in the book, and there were a few stories that kind of pushed the boundaries of what Huell felt comfortable with. Heights, for example, he was not a big fan of heights. The Golden Gate Bridge episode. There's a couple of questions I've got about that one, but the fact of the matter is that if anyone's ever walked the Golden Gate, just walked across the Golden Gate Bridge, I mean that's a little nerve-wracking. But you were doing things much higher off the ground than that, and Huell, of course, had to be there too.
Right, and he was in front of the camera, so you see that he's scared in a lot of these episodes, like the hangars in El Toro Tostani, right, those hangers, and he's up there, and of course, I'm scared of heights too, but I'm behind the camera, and you don't see me, but now I do get flashbacks on some of these places I was at. Yeah, some of these were very challenging, like visiting the tallest building here in window washing, the tallest building in west of the Mississippi. We went out with a window washer, and it was breezy, and it's the gentleman who does the windows has a remote control to extend the platform, and it's not working. So the gentleman on the building says, well, hit the reset button, hit the reset button. And I'm thinking to myself, please don't hit the release button. Yeah, and we got into some situations where, yeah, but like I say, I was behind the camera, so you don't see me.
But he certainly tried not to show that he was, sweating it out in some of those things. But he had enough, I guess ego is probably the right word, that he knew the image that he wanted to project, and so he was definitely, if he was going to go up there and do this, he was going to do it and not show fear.
Right.
Did he give equal consideration to you, because you're the one with all the equipment, and he could at least see his feet. You couldn't. Going up and down things.
We really didn't give that much thought. It was just about getting the story and trying to just get through it. There was one thing we did with cavalry soldiers down south, and he came to me and says, what about a nice final closing shot? I said, well, you got a beautiful sunset, you nice valley, you have the horses. Why don't I get a shot of you guys riding into the sunset? He says, great. So they get on their horses, they start riding off. Halfway into the shot, Huell falls off the horse. I said, Huell, you just ruined my shot. Okay, let's do it, take two. And two things Huell liked to brag about, that was he was from Tennessee, and he was in the Marine Corps, right? So that shot, he didn't want to do a take two because his leg was hurting, so that shot never got on the air.
Going back to the Golden Gate episode, it touched on there were a couple of other things. First of all, that Huell never considered, actually did not want to put any of the shows in for Emmy consideration. None of them.
Yeah, I asked Huell about that. He says, why don't you put in this show for Emmy consideration? And he says, no. He, I don't know, he had this thing about not wanting to lose to something of value or something like that. And I submitted the Golden Gate Bridge into the LA Press Photographers Association, and it did receive an award. But no, he never wanted to submit his shows in for Emmys or anything.
That was a shame. So
It cost me like 10 Emmys.
I mean,
I was about to ask, could you have?
It would be, the line, the stage with Emmys, but local.
But still.
I had five.
So the two of you did. So the two of you never got. The two of you never got to add Emmy award-winning such and such to your resume, to your credits.
He would have, but no, he would not allow us.
That's a shame.
Yeah, it's sad because many of them would have won some awards, and it's just for the producers, for Huell, and because we did some good ones and some that were kind of on shaky ground. And I told Huell one day, I said, Huell, you could do a show on a doorknob and just make it interesting. And it's just his tone of voice. He had this style that was simplistic, and people loved that. People loved talking to Huell. And as soon as we'd be anywhere, they'd come up to him, start talking to him. And he just had this thing about him that his style, his voice, and there'll never be another Huell Howser. There's people that are trying to duplicate the show and trying to do things like that, but there won't be another Huell Howser.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the travelogue type shows that are so popular now across so many different channels, or the ones that actually focus a lot on, you know, on food and dining and things like that. As you pointed out, he loved his food, and you know, he had a chance to, you know, share it on camera. He would go crazy, like the Seas
Oh, he
Candy
loved to
Factory or
eat.
some of the other things.
Right, and on the way back on Interstate 5, there was a hamburger place he loved to stop to eat. I would always try to eat very healthy. I haven't had a steak in 40 years. Vegetables, soups, that kind of stuff, healthy. And he loved his hamburgers, so I always take my little snacks, healthy snacks with me. And he'd stop and get his triple hamburger, and boy.
And that was with the shirt tucked in phase, and so obviously the
That was when his shirt was
tucked
still
shirt
tucked
out
in,
was
but-
the result of all of that later on.
Right.
There was an interview that that Hugh had given in 2008. Let me get a quote here because I'm curious. He was asked a question. It's hard to imagine you being angry, and his response was, "That's because I stay home when I'm angry or frustrated or tired or sick or whatever. You're rude to one person, and people say, you know, he seems so nice on TV, but in person he didn't say hello or anything. So when you step out of the house or the office, you have got to be prepared to give and give and give and give. They want you to stand up, have your picture taken with them, and you do it. What if I'd said no? Number one, that's not a good thing to do under any circumstances. Number two, if you said no, 500 people would have known that by this afternoon, or these days with viral videos and so forth, 5 million would have known, you know, by lunchtime." And so, yeah.
Vent.
Yeah, and yeah,
Right.
and of course, being a human being.
I was there 15 years, so it wasn't like it was a bad situation, but he could definitely be pissed off if things didn't go wrong or well. And yeah, he would get frustrated. But like I said, we were here, we stayed, so.
Yeah, he would say, this is the one place where I don't need to be me, right? And so, and you know, I think all of us, well, certainly Harry and I, the biggest question we get, was he as nice as he was on television? And we're very careful about what we say. And the pat answer is usually it was, or is, he was a boss. And he did not suffer fools. And we weren't yucking it up. He was there to work, we were there to work. And if things didn't go well, he was not happy. We did not hang out. We went to lunch together once a year for Christmas, unless we were filming. So, you know, it was a very professional relationship. And that can't be said for a lot of, I mean, I would take that, right, over a lot of other jobs. But yeah, he was exhausted. Being him was exhausting, right? And I think when he was with us, he just wanted to get his work done.
One thing I can add to that is, like, after we finished shooting, at first we'd kind of go out to get something to eat afterwards. And after a couple of shoots, I said, this is not going to work. So I talked to Huell and I said, Huell, once we get done shooting, why don't you go your way and I have to go and clean equipment, get tapes ready, get everything logged, and get things ready for the next day. And we'd go our separate ways, and unless he would tell me, this is kind of official, they want you there for this thing they're having tonight, okay, then I'd go. But I'd be back in my room at 9 o'clock and ready to get a good night's sleep and for the next day. But other than that, we didn't socialize together, we didn't hang out together, or didn't do any of that.
No, I hope this is. I produced the Golden Gate Bridge show, and it was my first big show, and it was a big show. And I went with these guys. In fact, I was right behind Louis the whole time. It was maybe the greatest thing I've ever gotten to do. I'm from San Francisco, so to stand on the top of the Golden Gate Bridge was pretty extraordinary. But driving with these guys, I was young and I was energetic and I was excited, and I'd get in the car and I'd be, and then it wasn't it cool when just nothing. These guys, they didn't talk to each other. Absolute dead silence for the 6 hours home. And I quickly realized Huell would just sort of like look back and just, you know, I could tell I was bugging him. So I shut up pretty quickly, but.
Would you say that one of the many moments of Hughes' cultural significance in Los Angeles and in California in general is when he got parodied on The Simpsons. You know, that would be kind of a touchstone of
I
you
think it
arrived.
was for us. We were freaking out.
Yeah.
For him, he didn't really get it. He got it. He got it eventually. But I think initially he just wasn't that moved by it. But it became a much bigger thing, I think, than he realized. And then they asked him to actually come and be himself and do his own voice. And that was pretty cool. I think he really loved that.
Now, Louis mentions in the book about some of the businesses that, you know, Hugh would go and visit, whether it was Galco's or Pink's or some of the other, you know, establishments, and their business would just go through the roof as a result of his visit. Now, were you guys having to field, you know, all these inquiries coming out of the woodwork who basically just wanted to get in there as a publicity tool for themselves? Or was it really more about, we have a genuine story to tell, and he's the guy to tell that story, and it'd be good for you guys. I mean, I guess were there a lot of people trying to take advantage of what Hugh can bring to their businesses or to their enterprises?
I mean, I guess so. I think most of the people that approached us really approached us because they felt like they fit our show and they fit Huell, and that they would be, you know, he would be interested in them and their, you know, 600 tea kettles or 2,000 ceramic elephants. And, you know, sometimes we were and sometimes we really weren't. And some people were very offended when we weren't into their idea. They're like, what do you mean? Like, you did the bunny lady and she's got bunnies all over her house. Why not do me? I have elephants all over my house. But I don't think people really tried to take advantage, and they would not have been successful because of his power of personality. Like I said, I mean, he would have seen it and avoided it and not given them the show that they wanted anyway. So, I went out to the Integratron, which is by 29 Palms in Joshua Tree. And it's this strange building that was built by a guy who thought there were UFOs coming. And these two women who run it, called the Space Sisters, became friends with Huell. And he did a show there. And I hadn't been out there in probably 10 years. And they were so excited when they saw me. And they're like, oh my God. And I mean, they were so happy. One of them started to weep. And how, like, the memory of Huell and the fact that he basically put them on the map and enabled them to keep their business. You know, I don't know. I think most of the people were genuine. And I think people who approached us were genuine, or certainly the ones that we went to.
I want to add that the classic was when we would do a restaurant, I would call or Harry would call, and Huell was very old fashioned, and he instilled in both of us a lot of values that we've both taken with us that have served us really well. And one of those was we always stayed in touch with the people we worked with. And anytime their show was airing, whether it was the first time or the 50th time, we picked up the phone and we called them and we said, just want to let you know the show's going to air again on Thursday night at 7:30, personally, every single time. Now, so the first time the show would air, I would say, or Harry would say, and it would be a chicken place, right? And we'd say, now, it's airing at 7:30 on Thursday night, so you need to be ready. Oh, yeah, we're fine. No, really, you need to be ready because I don't think you understand what's going to happen. No, we got it. We're used to busy crowds. Friday, by 5 o'clock, if they were open for lunch, I would get a call or Harry would get a call. These people freaking out. I can't, there's not a chicken within 20 miles of here. I don't know what to do, you know. And so that would happen a lot, and we would try to warn them. But you know, I think to this day, like Harry, I'll go to places that I worked with 25 years ago. And open arms and hugs and always trying to give me free food, which we don't take, try not to, because that was another Huell rule, you know, they shouldn't be giving away free food. So yeah, it affected and it benefited a lot of people, but I never felt abused and I never felt like we were getting a lot of calls, occasionally, but not much.
What were the Hughes rules? You just touched on a couple of them.
Well, I think just being polite. Right? Just being a gentleman. Southern gentleman. Treat people well, you know, no profanity, handwritten notes.
We had to handwrite notes when after the show, we would send people copies, you know, VHS or later DVDs. You know, they would get like 5 free copies. And we always had to, he would usually add a handwritten note himself. But we would have to write a handwritten note also. Just, you know, thank you if you need anything, here's my phone number. And that was just, you know, just sort of like being raised right, you know, to do the right thing.
Do each of you have episodes that you were particularly proud of for one reason or another, or for multiple reasons?
I mean, I'll start. I mean, the Wedding of the Water show, which is one of my biggest shows, probably one of the biggest shows that we did as far as how complicated it was one of my favorites because the topic was interesting and weird. I mean, we brought a gourd of water from the highest lake on the side of Mount Whitney, and they dumped it into the lowest lake in Badwater. And it was this whole elaborate thing, and we found films that had been rotting in someone's attic for 70 years. So that was one of my absolute favorites. But I mean, there's so many. I mean, literally, there's so many shows. I've worked on close to 700 plus shows, so it's hard to pick. But that's one of my favorites. Anyone where I got to dive into find archival footage. The Hollywood sign was great. We found footage that no one had seen in many, many years in Iowa, of all places. So, yeah, I don't know.
That's a hard question. You know, I'm at well over 1,000 shows that I produce, so that's a hard one. Obviously, the Golden Gate Bridge for me was extraordinary, and I think for Harry and I, you know, we're storytellers, we're documentarians. The hunt for the archival, the hunt to get those things that people haven't seen, and for me on that show, I was calling a lot of widows because I was trying to find guys that were original bridge workers. And, you know, Huell was pretty adamant, as was I. And it was, again, and I was getting lists from the bridge people, and they were all gone. But, you know, I stuck to it, and I found 2 guys who were still alive, brought them back, reunited them with the current bridge workers, and we had some just extraordinary moments. And, you know, going up and helicopters under the bridge, and we got to climb up it and down it and underneath it. And so as a San Franciscan, that was pretty special. But, there were so many shows for so many reasons that were special. It would be really hard to nail it down.
Yes, there's so many. 16-1 gold mine, going down into the gold mines in 2,000 feet. And of course, the Golden Gate Bridge is a very popular one. There's just so many that, and just learning the history of California, I love history, and California has so much to offer. The diversity of its terrain, we have the highest, the lowest, this year the wettest, maybe next year the driest. And it's the diversity in its people. I got to meet so many people that it's just, to me, California to me is so special. It's just awesome.
And I guess I just want to get a little bit into, maybe step into the weeds a little bit, and I do apologize. What was the average budget on a standard California Gold episode? I mean, obviously there had to be a set budget. No. What do you?
Well,
I
can tell you that
Okay.
that for the first probably 10 years I worked with Huell, we got $500,000 a year from Wells Fargo to do 12 shows. Did we do 12 shows? Usually no. We usually did 13 or 14 shows. So who's good at math? They're 12, 13 divided by 500. But, you know, Huell was, he was pulling from, it was just a big pot, right? So we'd get 500 from Wells Fargo. We'd get, it was 180 from the Ralph M. Parsons Foundation for the visiting series. We'd get 240 from the AAA to do the road trip series. So it all went into this big pot. And so there was, I guess you...
They weren't like separate accounts.
No, it was just...
Account and
it was,
check by hand, which he also hated once a month where he had to sit there and pay bills.
he paid our payroll for many years handwritten, and I finally said...
Earthling, why am I paying $29?
He looked at every single...
Earthling? Same thing it was last month. It's like your email. Every month.
And I had the unfortunate job of paying bills with him for all those years. And it was like being with your dad. And he'd go, what's this charge for water? We don't need, I'm like, Huell, we have a water tank. The water at Kcet is horrible. Why are we paying $40 a month for Arrowhead? That's crazy. I'm like, I have to go. Every month we'd have the same conversation. Like,
We did a show on Arrowhead.
So you know, some shows cost more than others. But, and then being Huell, when he went later on to get more money for Cal Gold, he dropped the budget. He asked for less money. I don't know why. I liked getting $500,000 a year from Wells Fargo, but then when we went to wherever, I can't remember who the next, but yeah, BP, it was like 380. So I don't know, he was odd.
And there were times also when we'd be driving back from a shoot and he'd see something that would catch his interest, whether it be a cactus field or just a place full of just junk or whatever. And he'd stop and want to do a show on it. And so he'd talk to the owner or something. He'd see this cactus field. Why are they growing cactus? Well, Hispanics eat cactus. We make it in salads. We use it for cooking and things like that. And he was just shocked. So we'd stop and do a show. How much you pay for that? Nothing. Except me. He was paying.
And so, you know, especially when you're out on the road trips and you're bringing back all these extra shows, these extra, you know, bits and pieces that really didn't fit into a, you know, what you had planned on for that particular set of shows, or that they just kind of got tucked away until
It just became
a
extra,
few
just
more
were extra
pieces put
shows.
together.
Well, in fact, we had a show called Bits and Pieces.
Yeah.
That's right.
Number 810, I believe.
Yeah, we took, you know, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, just little things he had done. You know, I think we did one on the side of the road. I mean, he would come up with any reason to do extra shows.
Are there shows that have never seen the light of day based on this kind of description, that a little bit of this, a little bit of that just never found its way into a
Very
cohesive
few.
story?
And they both involved animals.
I don't, what's the,
Wasn't there the dogs? Wasn't there another dog show that didn't make it, or was it just Coco?
I don't know. I don't remember the dog show.
Another thing with hospital dogs. We did one, and then there was, I don't know, maybe one or two. Not,
Yeah.
Surprisingly, there was no reason not to air a show, you know, unless something egregious happened like Coco, which we don't really know what happened.
But there's a wonderful chapter in the book, Louis, where you and Huell went to Soviet Georgia right after, basically as the Soviet Union is breaking up.
Right.
And I mean, it's a great chapter in the book. And did any of that footage ever find its way into? Was it ever aired?
It never aired.
Oh, it's a shame.
It was a long, long trip. We, I think, spent like 9-10 hours on a flight. And we got there, and we're shooting a story about the children at this hospital with doctors that go over there and take supplies and help them out. It was really a depressing story. And Huell didn't like doing sad stories or anything like that. He always wanted to do happy things. And so he comes to me and says, we can't do this. I said, well, why don't we go to a flea market or something, let's get something. So we go and spend a day at this market and interviewing people. And of course, the Georgians were going through really bad times at the time. And that was even more depressing. So we came back and nothing ever aired.
Does Chapman have all that stuff, or who kept it all?
Chapman, I think they don't have that one. Threw him away.
Ooh. And I would think with such a strong sense of history that's the last thing that someone would have encouraged him to do. Or
He didn't want anybody to see anything negative.
Yeah.
So if
You can write your own history.
yeah. But I mean, that's 1/10 of 1% of what he shot and probably got tossed.
Okay, we actually have arrived to a point where I think we can start doing some Q&A from the crowd. If anyone's got any questions, and get a microphone walking around. We can start taking some questions from the floor. So let me just ask this. I mean, in the last few years since Huell's passing and forth, the three of you have actually done. I mean, I was surprised to discover that the three of you have done panels like this before. Or, Louis, you've done some things, and you're doing some things, actually, next week. And so it's almost as if there's kind of like I don't want to say a cottage industry, but there's kind of a, you're kind of carrying the torch for explaining to people who, who Huell was, what the show was about, how it was important, why was it, why it was special. And are we anywhere near a point where we have to explain to the average person who Huell Howser was and what the show was about?
It depends on where you are,
Okay.
geographically. But it's shocking. I mean, Kathy, you guys were airing Huell 5 nights a week? 6 nights a week in prime time-ish? I mean, that speaks volumes. They're airing Huell Monday through Friday from 7 to 7:30. And other times as well. So do we have to explain who Huell is? No, not really. I mean, it's kind of amazing. He's got legs.
Yeah, for this pamphlet you've got, I think we're airing 22 episodes on President's Day.
Yeah, they're doing a marathon on President's Day. So.
Yeah, that's going to be quite something. And so, he's still relevant. He's still relevant. He's still a good storyteller.
But one of the things he always wanted in a show is that it had to be evergreen, right? It had to work.
Okay.
You could watch it now, you could watch it in 10 years, and it would still apply. And I think, for the most part, it worked. And most of the shows are still evergreen. You can still watch it and be interested.
So topical stuff wasn't anything that would make past the story discussion that you guys would have.
Very rarely. I mean, it had to be a spectacular situation for that to happen. I can only think like the riots would be, or like blood.
Long Beach Naval Air Station.
Yeah.
Couple, not many.
Yeah.
There was one story that Louis tells that Huell actually took a stand, LA County, in the early 90s when they wanted to cut the library budget. Huell did a show about that. And supposedly, according to Louis, the Board of Supervisors found the money to keep all the libraries open. And so that was certainly, that was kind of an advocacy stand that he took that particular time, but he didn't seem to be an advocate of, in a lot of ways. He was, tell a good story and keep it fresh, keep it evergreen, and that was it. But he didn't want to take specific stands on things except for the one or two.
Yeah, he wanted to save that Long Beach Naval Shipyard, which was a beautiful place. I was stationed there for about a month waiting for transfer. And that was a real awesome place, and he really tried hard to save that and didn't succeed. Money talks.
Okay, do we have questions from the floor? Okay, I think we've got one mic over there.
What was his background before coming to KCET? How did he get started in public television?
Let me take it. Yeah. So when Huell was in college, he was on the college debate team. And in those days, the local stations would air the college debates. And the president of the station saw Huell and he stood out. And he called him in. He said, "What are you doing?" Huell had a degree in history. And Huell said, "I have no idea." And the guy said, "Okay, well, come see me after you graduate." And I think it was a week later, they stuck a mic in his hand and sent him off to do, the kissing pig story or whatever it was. And those little 1-minute feel-good stories on the local news. And then he just kind of crept his way across. You want to add something? You're frantically reaching for the, go ahead.
But I mean, the local Tennessee station that I worked at had the home run team, which was Pat Sajak was the weather. Who's the guy? I'm forgetting. John Tesh was the anchor, and Huell was the 2-minute human interest person. So it was like a home run from like Gallatin, Tennessee. Quite a good team. And then he went to New York. He got in, I think, a little trouble there for having some advocacy, right? Didn't he make a stand in New York on one of the morning shows? I forget what the stand was. And he basically was put on leave for 2 weeks. Do you remember what it was that he did? He was put on leave for 2 weeks, and he said, skip that, and he flew to California and got a job with Entertainment Tonight, right? CBS.
CBS, yeah. And then they were doing video logs, and Huell wanted to be part of PBS, and he went to KCT and said, "I'll do the video logs for free if you let me do them. I won't charge you." And they said, "Great." And he just very quickly made video logs his own, and that launched his career at KCT. Stephen Kolzicki, That's right. He was the president of the station at the time. Head of programming.
Back there.
I was curious if Huell was good about going to the doctor or how he handled the whole situation toward the end.
He was, that's a good question. Well, he was at the end. The weird thing was, well, I mean, he had.
Never put sunscreen on.
Oh, no, yeah, he was.
10 hours a day on like Mount Whitney, exposed to the sun. We're like, dude, did you put sunscreen on? He's beat red. He's like, no.
Yes, that's the one. He wasn't good about his health, but he was good about going to the doctor. And you know, we did a show called what was it, the Colossal Colon, about making sure you get your colonoscopy. And he was getting a routine colonoscopy when they found his cancer. So, you know.
Yeah, you're talking about the deal about not liking heights and so forth. I remember, there's one part I didn't remember, I just remember part of it. He was interviewing people who were climbing up the backside of Half Dome in Yosemite. I don't know if he actually went and climbed up also, to follow them, because some sort of a stairway or something. I don't know if he did, I just wondered if he did.
Yeah, I don't think he actually ever got all the way up to the top. Partly because it's like a 2-day situation, and he couldn't handle spending 2 days on one show. And the fact that you'd have to sleep out and camp out, and it became with gear and extra batteries. So yeah, I don't think he actually made it all the way up on that one. But it's also pretty scary. I don't know if you've ever been on the back where you have to hold on to those cables. It's not a pleasant climb.
Good afternoon. I think there's nobody in the world like Huell Howser, as you all said. And I was thinking of, because I went to something for Art LeBeau recently, who's still living at 93. Art LeBeau is, there could be a Mount Rushmore. Huell would be honored in Los Angeles or in California. Art LeBeau, Mulholland, I can go on. That's your job, Michael, to come up with a program like that, of people like that. But
See what I can do, Tom.
But I think the thing that's so important is how he inspired people, more than any politician ever inspired. And he loved Tom Bradley, which is very special. He liked John Ferraro, who was his councilman for many years, and he liked his deputy, who worked for John Ferraro. But I just want to know on the thing, how much do you miss him? That's what I really want to know, because he's almost like Tom Brady you got Tom Brady, the quarterback who always wins. Huell always won, and he made people. I remember being with him in Palm Springs, walking down. It was dark on Highway 111, but you knew his voice, and people would turn around. It was, and that's Huell Howser, and then he would always receive him, as you spoke of earlier. Anyway, how much do you miss him?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was an amazing gig. I was there for 15 years. I got to do research all day long and dig up old photos and footage, which is what I love to do, and learn about California history, which is what I love to do. So yeah, I do miss the whole job and the process. And it was also a TV job that, although I was never nominated for an Emmy, I was able to get home at like 5. Like, we left at 5 o'clock on the dot. I mean, it's not even a joke. People in the office would laugh at us because we would, 5:01, we'd be going down the stairs. And there's no job on TV, especially when you're making like 60 episodes a year, where you leave at a normal time. So it was, that was great, and that was a blessing, and I do miss it, and I miss him, and, we butted heads plenty, Huell and I, but yeah, it was good.
Well, I'm just going to say, Tom, I saw you snuck in here. And Huell didn't genuinely respect and love a lot of people in this town. I mean, he did, but Tom was really one of his favorite people. I'm going to leave that alone. They had a very special relationship. I find that I miss Huell at weird times. It hits me in weird places. I'll tear up, which is, weird. But the longer he's been gone, the more I miss him. So, it was such a part of my life for so long that you can't not feel something, and I get emotional when I think about him. And I'm also just incredibly proud of what we did, that we were part of something that is a legacy, and that's a snapshot of California that will live on forever. And that was his intent, You know, that was really what he wanted, was to have this capsule that could travel through time, and in 20 years, people can look at these shows and say, this is California in 1999 or 1992 or whatever it was. So, yeah, it was pretty special.
Yeah, he is dearly missed, and I was fortunate to work with Huell, and I was with him for 12 years. And it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed, because I got to work with so many different producers, actors, talent, and productions that, but Huell stands out as being a very nice, special person. And I had the privilege of shooting with him. So I'm thankful for that.
Mike, how long between the Music Institute's California Here I Come, which was the greatest thing you captured, and his passing? Was it a year or two? Or?
Oh, no, it was a couple years. It was, yeah, it was probably 3 years.
Really?
Don't you think?
He's saying, I thought that was close.
Was it close? Maybe it was, maybe it was 2 years.
It was confusing because we sort of knew that he wasn't well in the office, but we didn't really know what was going on. But I mean, he definitely said, like, I'm not really shooting anymore.
I knew what was going on.
I'm not really.
I picked him up at the hospital.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
I didn't
But
tell
that was
anybody.
getting later. I mean, he basically said, like, the show's going to end in a year, but we're not telling anybody for
Yeah.
like 6 months.
Yeah.
And he took some visitings and repackaged them as California's Gold so that people in other affiliates up north would think it's like a new episode and we were still doing shows. I don't know how this track got started, but yeah. Oh, how close it was to that one where he sang California Here I Come. I don't know. I think it was fairly close to a couple years at most.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a couple of things. First of all, how many shows do you think you could have done left? And then one more thing, I want to know if you can add anything to the one time I saw Huell confused, and that was when he met General Bob at the Baghdad Cafe.
I'll let Phil talk about the Baghdad Cafe because that was his show and that went south really quickly, actually. I think I picked up the phone when Huell called and said, like, nothing's where it's supposed to be, where's Phil? And he was not pleased. But as far as how many shows we could have done, the answer is forever, because as Huell said, and this is a sort of paraphrasing him, but there's as many stories in California as there are people, right? There's no end to, he could find something fascinating about every person and get a show out of it. So there's no shortage of show ideas. And we literally, when we wrapped the show up, I mean, we had like 7 or 8 filing cabinets, 4 drawers filled with show ideas that were pre-researched. You know, we had the contact, we had found photos, we had done everything, and they were basically ready to go. And, you know, for every show we produced, there were probably 5 or 6 folders of shows waiting. But Baghdad Cafe and the guy who licks rocks.
You know, Baghdad Cafe was part of the Newberry Spring show, and Huell had found, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, but because everything was my fault if it didn't go well. And, you know, so we got this driving tour. It was like a Xerox copy of this weird driving tour of Newberry Springs in the middle of nowhere. So Huell was just kind of amused by it and thought, I'm gonna go check this out. So and it's all on the show, and he's standing there with this piece of paper, and he's like, there's supposed to be a museum here, and there's just nothing, it's just desert. And nothing's where it's supposed to be, and he goes to the next place, and it's closed, and he goes to the next place, and they're like, we have no idea what you're talking about. But, you know, being Huell, it ended up becoming a cult classic, right? And that was the beauty of Huell, is, I mean, not a lot of people in his position, or I guess most people in his position would have thrown up their arms and gotten in their car and driven home and yelled at their producer. He made the best of it, and he met some amazing characters. And, you know, if you're not confused when you meet Bob, then you're an alien, because, you know, he's one of the weirdest people on the planet, but charming. And Huell made the best of a weird situation.
Louis, now you retired in 2001.
Yes.
And so did you follow the show? Did you watch the new stuff that Huell was doing after you left?
Once in a while I'd catch a show, but I was so busy working with other producers and other companies that I was still traveling a lot, and I'm kind of traveled out. But mentioning, follow up to what Phil was saying, we went down to El Centro and we were supposed to shoot the show, and I don't know what happened. The people didn't show up or something happened. So Huell turns to me and says, well, what do you think we should do? I said, well, let's go to a bar, have a beer. Bartenders have all kinds of stories. So we went to some bar and talked to the bartender. And yeah, we walked away with a story, but I don't even remember what it was about.
You have another question out there?
What we always noticed was Huell's always touching everything. Was there any time where he was like out for a week because?
Well, no, but my favorite story, and you can see it, is we went to, well, yeah, and especially people's food, which was just gross, you know? He'd like walk over and go, what are y'all having? He'd like, you know, pick up a chip or like, don't do that. It's just weird. And then, but we went to the, we did a show about the Studebaker, right? The history of the Studebaker. And there's a rich California history. You probably know it. It starts with the wheelbarrow, which goes to wagons, which goes to cars. Well, they have an original Studebaker wheelbarrow up at the Gold Mining Museum up in Placer. So, you know, the nice docent's talking to Huell about this wheelbarrow, and Huell goes over and picks up the wheelbarrow. And you can see this woman's face, and she's very cool, but she goes, and, you know, it's like, son, don't, please, don't, this is precious. And, but, you know, yes, he was very hands-on, and it was always a joke. We were always very amused when he would pick up something he should not pick up, and you could see the look on the people's faces. It was always pretty funny.
But even here at the library, I mean, Carolyn Kozo-Cole would always put on her special white gloves to flip through the photo, and Huell would just dive in and like grab the photos, and you know, it's in the show. You see, she's got the gloves, he doesn't.
Who else? There we go. Down. There we go.
Well, I have two questions. The first one, I just texted Cameron Tucker to let him know I'm here, and he wants to know why he wasn't invited to this.
Don't talk to us.
That's for him. That's a question for him.
I'll ask you later. The other question, I'm very curious. We're huge fans who actually watch him 6 days a week, and we want to know, what was his personal life like? Was he married? Did he have kids?
He was not. He was a dyed-in-the-wool bachelor, and he did not talk to us about his personal life, ever. It just wasn't discussed. He had some good friends, and he loved being at his home in the desert, mostly. But again, we kept our personal lives very separate, and he kept his personal life very separate.
With all that footage, can you describe in a little more detail the editing process from what you took to what actually ended up online?
It's pretty simple. Huell had a beta deck in his office and a beta deck at home, each with monitors, and he would come home and he would pop the tapes in, and he would sit down with the yellow legal pad, and he would make time code notes. I don't know if you guys know what that means, but as the tape's moving, it's got little numbers, and he'd say, okay, 21 to 23, and then he'd make all these notes. And then he would go into what we call an online bay. This was before digital. And he would just sit there with an editor, and he'd go, okay, go to 21, 22. Okay, cut it here. Now go to 24, 27 to 29, 22. Okay, and it was just as old-fashioned as you could get. And that's how he did it. He edited his own shows. We did not edit those shows. It was Huell and an editor. That was it.
Hi, one of the things that I've been watching it for many, many years. And one of the things that really impressed me is at the end of it, there's always, this show has been endorsed by the California Association of Librarians, Teachers, and I forget what the other one was. Does that mean that those episodes are now in schools? In the school libraries, whichever schools have libraries? What was the distribution to those, and how did those organizations distribute or endorse, or did they put money in?
No. They some teachers do use the shows for discussing a certain topic or things like that, or some teachers use the mission shows to, because fourth grade they talk about the missions, but per se, no. Depends on the individual teacher.
I'm going to actually expand on that. Huell loved teachers. He loved museums, and he loved libraries. I cannot say that strong enough. And if somebody needed something, we sent it to them, and we did not charge them. We did a very definitive teacher's guide that went along with the 21 missions that I was fortunate enough to work on with folks from the California State Library Foundation, which we would send out basically at cost to fourth grade teachers throughout the state. So, you know, Huell was all about helping those organizations out when he could.
I thank all of you, all the staff throughout the years for the job, and Huell, of course, for the job that you all did with regards to California history, because all the places that you visited, I want to go visit now.
That's the point.
Because now I never knew that they were there. And not only did they capture those places at that moment in time, but it was about touching history and following back to the beginning of California. And I know that that's what one of the purposes was, but to have, I don't know of any place else that has that anywhere in any other state. So thank you to everybody who contributed to that.
I got a question for Louis on this one. In your book, you wrote sometimes you guys, you split when the show was over. You went your way, and sometimes Huell would stay kind of late at night. Maybe had a couple drinks. I remember a couple too many drinks. Was there ever a time when he couldn't shoot the next day because he was just a little hungover or just too much of a good time?
Should I talk about that? I mean, he liked to go out and have a good time with the people that we would work with and shoot and stuff like that. And he just go have a good time. And then sometimes I'd go with him. He asked me to go. And there would be once in a great while, I'd have to tell him the next morning that, you're a little too color red. And he knew I took care of him. And so he said, okay, take the day off. And we'll meet the next day and carry on with the shoot. But these shoots were very simple, very easy, a lot of fun to do. And but he was great.
Tie in with that, the Oakland Ale Company made a Huell Howser beer as his picture on the bottle.
Oh, I haven't seen that either.
This is for you, Phil. And I'm sorry, I missed your name. Harry. So at the Chapman Archives, they have like a calendar blotter of his. And there's a Burning Man symbol on the dates of the Burning Man. Did he ever go to that, or was he planning on going to that?
He talked about going to that for 10 years. He talked about a couple of things that he was going to do, like that. One, climbing Mount Whitney, which poor Harry had to organize 3 or 4 times, which is not an easy thing to do. But no, he never made it. He was very interested, but he never. And I'm just going to point out that Huell absolutely hated traveling, hated it, unless there was a camera involved. So, we each have a lot of stories of, he said, I'm going on a cruise to the Caribbean. And we're like, oh, really? No, it's going to be great. And then 2 days later, yeah. And then he'd come, I'm on the boat, get me off of here, I hate it. And so we'd have to find a tender to go out to get him and bring him back. And so he eventually realized he hated traveling, unless it was pretty much in California or he was shooting himself. I know it's weird, but.
Hi. The Tbilisi tapes exist. They're on the beta at Chapman.
The what tapes?
The Tbilisi, Georgia.
The Soviet Georgia tapes.
They do exist.
Good.
They're on beta. Louis, you did a marvelous job with The Elephant Man. Some of the finest camera work I've ever seen. Can you tell us a story about that, please?
Well, I did mention earlier that when we got there, the story was so depressing that Huell didn't want to do it. And so that's why we decided to go on to the flea market and... Oh, the Elephant Man? Oh. Well, the Elephant Man was the first time I ever shot with Huell. And I met him at the commissary there at Kcet. And then we talked, and I wished him luck. I told him I hope I get a chance to work with you someday, and lo and behold, up to a week later, I'm assigned to shoot with Huell, the Elephant Man. We go to San Diego, and Charlie Franks, and he comes up to me and says, Louis, now remember, we're not doing brain surgery here. So it kind of tells me the style that he wants me, how to shoot the story. So we start shooting, and it was such a tearjerker that because the elephant came up to Charlie Franks, put his trunk around him and saying, like, where the hell have you been? And he hadn't seen the elephant in 15 years. So it was a very touching story, and it was put together very easily, and the station liked that. The station loved the way he was very cost-effective for the station, so they started to bring him in for more programming.
And it's obvious that because Huell is still such a big presence on Kcet, that the station still has a lot of faith in what he left behind. I mean, with the show marathons coming up, and it just seems that the changeover from which was about the same time that Huell shut down production, was right after the Scientologists bought the studio site, and Kcet was kind of splitting itself off from PBS there for a few years. And so was that kind of the end of an era, as you guys saw? I mean, the timing was just very sad.
That was the final nail in the coffin for Huell. Yeah. When the station sold the lot to the Church of Scientology, he just said, that's it, I'm done. And he moved to a smaller office and just took one kind of assistant with him. And then he only did really one show after that. And that was also when he got sick. So yeah, everything kind of came together, sadly.
Do you think he'd be able to stand out today if with all the different voices making themselves heard and making themselves seen? Do you think he'd be able to stand out in quite the same way if he was starting from scratch? I mean, it's speculative, I know, but anyone have any ideas on that?
I think he could make his own mark, and he just had that talent of communicating with people and just going to them, and like Phil says, not having these big meetings and stuff like that. He had this way of him of just making people at ease and selling his stories, and I think he probably do okay.
I'm going to add that I think that if Huell hadn't gotten sick, he'd be absolutely making shows, and he talked about it. He would do specials. He wouldn't be cranking out 60 shows a year, but he would do stunts. He'd do another Palm Springs week, or he'd do a Bakersfield week, or he would find ways to keep himself in the game. But I think Huell would have done it. And he said, I want to die with a microphone in my hand. That's what he said. Mm-hmm. And he literally wants to fall over, and that's the last shot. It didn't happen, but I think it could have.
All right, we're going to wrap this up. We thank everybody for coming out and sharing this discussion with us today. For those of you who have books, we will be doing a signing out in the foyer in a few minutes, so we thank you for coming out and joining us. We thank our partners at Kcet for this episode. We'll have another one in April, and we'll have something else coming up in June, again with Kcet's help and cooperation. And so follow us and stay in touch with what's going on. Thank you, everybody.